So, first off, my name is Kerrie Pickering, obviously. I wear a few different hats. So there's people here from our climate change project who have seen me wear the climate change hat, which was an absolutely fantastic project that I was fortunate to be a part of. Other people here have seen me as part of the Environmental Sustainability Research Centre as the coordinator. And this is actually one of the few times that I come forward in a different role as a little bit of a researcher. And this is actually the first time that my thesis work is actually being talked about and exposed to everybody. So it's a bit like a kitten coming out for the first time, and I'm a little bit nervous of it, so just bear with me. My supervisor, Tony Shaw, who Debbie has already spoken about, can't be here, so I can't be judged on that, but my other supervisor, Brian, is here, so I'm sure if I don't do it well, I'll hear all about it anyway. But so you do see me wearing different hats. Climate change is such an important issue that there's many different bits of research going on with it and happening within our centre. What I'm going to talk to you about, though, is looking at the Ontario wine industry and specifically looking at adaptive capacity there. So I don't really need to go into too much detail now about why we need to be looking at adaptation. I think you've had just about every speaker give you that talk. The only thing I would like to stress on this side is one of the things Ryan had talked about, reaching a tipping point. You know, are we moving from what we've known into something new and unknown? Originally, predictions had been for a 2 degrees increase in global temperature. And that's actually been revisited and is now 4 degrees. And the really important part of that is that 2 degrees, spontaneous adaptation was expected. At 4 degrees, we're coming into a lot of feedback systems, and even planned adaptation is not a sure thing. So what we know has changed, and adaptation is becoming much, much more important. And the wine industry is particularly interesting because the grapes can only be grown in very few areas. They're very temperamental. They like a very, very limited growing season. When that growing season gets too hot or too cold, we see it in the grapes. And so the grapevine has become the canary in the coal mine for climate change, because this is where we're starting to see changes before we're seeing it in other crops. Other crops are annual. These are perennial, so they're in for 50 or more years. So we need to know what we're doing with it, and we can see what's gone on before. Everybody knows their vintages and what the vintages were like, so we can see the changes there. And as Debbie's already said, there are changes that are happening, but I won't bother going through those with you because you've really had them already. So, what is adaptation? And it's a really important question. Adaptation is a continual process. It's a continual adjustment. It can be planned or it can be spontaneous, in that if there's a big flood and people change the way they do things instantly, that's called a spontaneous adaptation. Then you can get a planned one, which is what Debbie was talking about, what the wine industry is trying to do. Adaptation is obviously something we need, but our ability to adapt depends on our capacity for adaptation. So there may be new technologies that come out of the grant that Debbie's just spoken to you about, but if there aren't the resources within the industry to facilitate using these strategies, they're not going to go very far towards adaptation for the industry. So what I'm looking at is not the adaptation strategy, I'm looking at all that foundation that comes before it. And you'll see in the definition that I have up here, if you just go down to this area here, it says it is determined by resources, technical, financial, social, institutional, political. There's a few more there, which I've added and I'll show you. But what it means is that when we talk about adaptation, there's a lot more going on underneath it that builds before we can have the adaptation take place. So the purpose of my research was to basically assess the adaptive capacity of the Ontario wine industry. First off, it was to develop an assessment framework from the literature, then basically take it out into the industry and empirically assess it, and then come back with that assessment, look at it and see what insights we could gather for the industry from it. And here's my baby. conclusions, reflections. Within every determinant, there was capacity. There was no determinant that came out and it was, it was, oh my gosh, there's nothing happening. There was positive stuff happening in everyone. There does seem to be a lack of recognition and understanding of some of the resources and capacity within the industry. As I just said, some of the determinants the industry has little control over, and it's important to recognise those. And one bit that I haven't spoken about is I had a couple of questions in my questionnaire, and what it asked questions in a way to find out if people were at a coping threshold. So it's a bit like if you're at the end, okay, it's the end of the month, you've got no money and the bill comes in, and you're like, oh, what am I going to do? So you just hanker down and you wait, and that's when you're coming near the end of a coping capacity. And when I asked questions like that to the industry, I think I had 1 or 2% of people say they felt personally they were at a coping capacity. So overall, the industry isn't near a coping capacity, which is just a really good thing because it just shows that there is a lot of room there for movement. And when you're not close to a coping capacity, you're quite happy to look at new skills and new strategies. So it just means the industry is open for those sorts of things. And I'd just like to thank Covey and Debbie and Kerrie Pickering and Brian for their help, and obviously for the grant and everything. And thank you.